Everything you need to know for photography in under 10 minutes. And it all has to do with light. Now this applies to any visual art, painting, cinematography, graphic design. It doesn't matter because we're all dealing with light. So when you look at all visual arts, you're technically manipulating light and or the way you see things. You can understand things at a much deeper level when you understand these core concepts that I'm going to talk to you about. Now, Dean Collins, to be fair, he was the first one that taught this to me back in 1987 when I did a one-day workshop down in Toronto. Anybody who's been around photography for a number of decades, especially since then, you'll have heard of Dean Collins. Lighting is everything, but there's only shadow, true tone, and highlights, or also known as specular highlights. Shadow is a false tone, specular highlight is a false tone, and then the true tone is a true tone. Again, examples to come. So just burn that into your brain. 3 tones. The other thing is there are only 3 things that really influence the way lighting brings out texture and or creates the end result. Those things are the actual source. What is the actual source you're dealing with? And the angle of the light coming at that particular subject that you're painting or photographing or looking at. So the angle and the distance. So if you have a big light source, let's say 6 feet, and then you take that and you put it beside a subject, it'll create a different effect versus if it's in front of you. Right now, I have windows facing my studio, and that lighting is coming at me. It's very flat. I like this lighting for this kind of a scenario. But if I turned 90 degrees, I would create shadows. Again, samples and examples soon. Just give me 2 minutes. So you have to understand that. The actual source, the angle with which that light is coming at the subject, and the distance. How far away is it? Those 3 influences will affect the way your lighting looks. So you have 3 tones, 3 influences. That's it. Okay, let me give you some examples. All the way from Dean Collins himself. He used a lot of billiard balls. So you've got here the specular. Remember I said highlight. And then you've got down here the shadow. And the diffused, which is the true tone. He's called it the diffused. The diffused tone is a true tone. So the ball is actually this color. Now when you look at the specular highlight, you ask yourself, is that the true color? It's a blue billiard ball, but you see white. That's why it's a false tone. Same with down here. The shadow side, it's black. Is that the true color of the ball? Think about these things and really try to understand them if you're out taking photographs. If you can look at light this way, you'll have a much deeper understanding and you'll be able to apply the use of lighting so that the moment you take that picture, make all the difference in the world. Okay, let's look at the same billiard ball. And this is with a different surface. So your surface and what it is you're photographing, whether it's different texture or whether it's shiny or not shiny, these things matter as well. So the actual subject. Here's a good example of how light and the intensity of the light affects the final result. So you've got what's called a 1-to-1 ratio. So that's approximately half the light is falling into the shadow side. And here you've got a ratio is called 4:6. So you've got a lot less light coming in the shadow. See right here? Okay, a little bit technical, but I think you get the idea, don't you? Let's go down here and look at this picture here. Now, if we look at this snapshot I photographed years ago down in Costa Rica, you'll notice that the couple, completely in darkness, that's called shadow. So when you look at an image like this, and if you were actually standing in this scene at the time I took the picture, it would be like broad daylight. So you wouldn't see blackness, you wouldn't see all this darkness and richness around you. I manipulated the exposure to achieve that on purpose, and the way I did that was positioning them behind the sun so that the sun, which was really, really bright, created very strong shadows. This is a very extreme example, and it's what's called a silhouette, but it works. Don't you agree? Well, I want you to understand how angle, source, and distance plays a big, big role in something like this. Let me give you another example right here. Snapshot I took years ago down at the C&E. I just thought this was kind of cool. These people were going around on this spinny thing, and the sky was kind of bright, so I photographed that. And as mentioned earlier, you can see that there's no detail in the people. It's complete blackness. All right, so how might this roll out in an actual regular picture? Let's look at this young lady here. Now, I photographed this during an actual portrait session years ago, and this is a really good example of how lighting works in a portrait scenario. So again, you can apply it to just about any scenario, whether it's a scenic or a commercial shoot, or if you're photographing, you're out on a trip somewhere, you're photographing touristy type pictures. The more you understand about light, the more you can create maximum results. It's important that you understand that. Okay, so in this picture here, this side of her face over here is open sky. There are trees, hedges on our right, her left, and there's an opening over here, and it's facing the north. So we got open sky coming in. So it's very broad, it's very soft, and you can see that. Now the shadow is very, very dark because there's literally no reflection on this side. There's no open sky. It's a very dark area like you would see in along many hedges or in a forested area, or if you're out in a park. If you look for this kind of a scenario, you can maximize and create literally portrait level, studio level images just by being able to see the light. So you'll see here on her left side, like this is not the true color of her skin. That's a false tone. That's a shadow. By the way, if you were to ask me what is the most important tone, it's not a fair question to ask. But let's assume you did. If you ask me, Rob, what is the most important tone? I would have to say personally, it's shadow. Because I think shadow is the underlying foundation. It's like bass and drums in a band. It's the foundation. It's kind of like, doesn't seem to be that important. Sorry, drummers. Sorry, bassists. But it is. It's everything. And when you look at shadows and the way you can manipulate shadow, whether you're making them darker or lighter, and where you position them in reference to the angle of the light. Remember we talked about angle? That's everything. Look at this angle here. Because it's coming from an angle, let's call that 10 o'clock, is creating these nice shadows. Now when you have these shadows, the shadow creates shape. Now if you have light coming at her flat, you have much less of that effect. I want really nice lighting that mimics what I create in a studio. So look at her hair right here. That is not the true color of her hair. That's called a specular highlight. Again, it's a false tone because it's not the true color, but it looks good, doesn't it? It works. All right, let me show you one more example and then I am out of here. Right here. Here's a scenic picture I photographed out on Lake Yearn, Georgian Bay at sunset-ish in July. Now, there's a good example right here of what we call highlight. You see that a lot on water. This is a false tone. Now, if the sun was behind me, this scene would look completely different. To me, this is the way I want a scenic to look. And this is what you see often in National Geographic. Backlighting. That light is coming at you, or if you can get the light coming at an angle on a scenery shot, look at the way those shadows are bringing all the different textures and all the different cuts in the rocks, and it's doing beautiful things to the ripples in the water, and it's creating that amazing line. That's a false tone. Remember I said that? That's a false tone. This island here is not really black, but because it's in shadow and because this side of the island and the color of the rocks in here, it's sort of got that very dark shadowy effect. When you combine all three, creates a very, very desirable result. So think in terms of you're painting with light, 3 tones, and 3 influences. Shadow, true, false, specular or highlight, and then angle, source, and distance. How far away is that light from the actual subject? I hope this has helped. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you later.